Okay, let's see, it's 5 after the hour. I'd like to begin. Again, thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy day to attend this webinar. We'll wait, and so I think everyone's here now. We have a pretty large turnout. My name is Mark Cohen. I'm Director of Business Development, and I welcome everyone today to our summer school. And thank you for attending today's webinar. This is one of many webinars of the Freemind Group Summer School. And today we are exploring funding beyond the SBIR, STTR, RO1s, and R21s for companies. This is the second in the series of Wednesday at noon webinars. Next week coming up is non-dilutive funding for non-U.S. applicants. So for all foreign attendees today, please make sure to register. And I'd like to just give a bit of an overview of who we are as an organization. We're considered to be the global non-dilutive funding leader. We've been doing this for 14, almost 15 years now, with 40 full-time employees in our professional department, split between our analysts and grant writers. We have quite a diverse client base representing academic institutions, university medical centers, independent research institutes, as well as industry from the small startups to the large pharmaceutical companies. And we submit upwards of 300 applications annually across the board for all mechanisms for the non-dilutive space. And as a matter of fact, one of our real strong points is extensive experience in submitting and winning large-scale applications with over a 50% success rate. And when you look at the non-dilutive funding as an opportunity to fund your scientific research, it's best to identify the most relevant funding opportunities, which comes through a process of determining your particular project and where the best sources of funding are, and to strategize to maximize your chances for an award through a strategic approach by uncovering all areas of funding opportunities available to you across the non-dilutive funding landscape. And so we're with you throughout the process, all the way up to the final budget negotiations, as well as the last mile, so to speak, which are the just-in-time information requests that the particular granting agency might have. And so as we look to the particular agencies that are available, there's a large number of them, 27, which cover a broad range of diseases and population segments. For example, on the disease side, oncology, the central nervous system, and infectious diseases. And for population groups, women, children, and the aged. And so we focus in this particular webinar today on the NIH with its 27 institutes, but we do look to other other governmental agencies as well: BARDA, FDA, CDC, NSF, as well as Department of Defense, and then private not-for-profits as well, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Michael J. Fox, etc. And what we look at is from the NIH standpoint, the budget for them, which is about $29 billion for 2013, of which $24 billion is relevant to the non-dilutive space. The other is for intramural research, and this would be the extramural of the $24 billion, and that's where we're focusing within the NIH, and that's across all programs. So when we look at the categorical spending of the NIH, we look at cancer at $5.5 billion for 2013, neuroscience is at about $5 billion, as well as infectious diseases of about $5 billion. So that's $15 billion worth of non-dilutive funding that that's available and that was distributed in 2013, with an average award of about $500,000. So I think that this is a very important slide because in 2013, the NIH awarded a little over $1.3 billion in total to industry, and of that, $750 million stem from the SBIR, STTRs, which most companies know about these and how to pursue them. But few are aware of the non-SBIR sources, which accounted for close to $600 million in 2013. So again, the common view of companies is that the primary non-dilutive source of government funding available to them is through the SBIR, STTR mechanisms. And the focus of today's webinar is to explain how there is a large pocket of relatively untapped government funding that possibly your competitors are taking advantage of, and you, as of yet, are not. So the funding for the SBIR is fixed at 2.8% of the NIH budget, whereas the funding for the other sources is almost $24 billion. And the amount that went to industry through non-SBIR sources was close to $600 million in 2013. And this does not represent monies going to industry as subcontractors or collaborators, which the amount is much higher. So how do we go after this almost $600 million in funding from 2013? And when we look at the breakdown, about $121 million went to RO1s and R21s, as you see in the donut chart, which is not a fixed percentage of the budget, which for 2013 was 2.8%, as I mentioned earlier with the SBIR, STTRs. Rather, this is based upon awards to industry, which is increasing year to year. So there's tremendous room for growth. So this is an untapped area of funding. The RO1s, R21s, again, for 2013 was about $121 million. So when we look at the total pie of the RO1s and the R21s for 2013, it's about $2.5 billion that's open to the industry through these two mechanisms. And I'd like to share with you some statistics to give you some perspective. And to start with, I'd like to focus on the RO1 success rates. And in 2013, there were a total of 25,000 applications, of which there were 5,400 applicant awards, and the success rate was about 21%. So there's, as you can see from the graph, 21% is quite a meaningful statistic in terms of your chances for an RO1. And when we look at the R21 success rates, in 2013 there were a little over 13,000 submissions and almost 4,000 awards with the success rate of 13%. So what's interesting is that the success rates are quite on par with those from the SBIR, STTR areas, and this is an untapped source of funding available to you. And what's interesting in this particular slide, going back to the RO1s for a moment, are the success rates for the established versus first-time applicants. So what this shows is that currently there is no real difference of the success rates between established seasoned applicants and first-time submitters. So that if you're concerned about your chances of entering into new sources of funding due to lack of experience, there's really no need to worry. So let's now get into these mechanisms in detail, the RO1s and the R21s. On an overview of the mechanisms, the R21s are exploratory. This is high risk, high reward, very early stage research that's to be undertaken. Whereas the RO1s, this is a proposed project that's related to the programmatic interests of one or more of the participating NIH institutes and centers. And this is based upon the descriptions of the programs, which I'll get into detail later. But the key point here is that this is a larger term project, whereas the R21s, again, are more proof of concept, very early stage, high risk, high reward projects. So when we compare them side by side, in terms of time frame, the R21 is up to 2 years, as well, and the RO1, being a larger term project, is up to 5 years, and then the monies available through the award is quite substantially different. Whereas the R21, it's only about $275,000 in direct costs over 2 years, whereas the RO1 offers up to $500,000 a year for up to 5 years, so giving you about $2.5 million over 5 years, as well as the fact that it's not capped. You can have an exclusion to pursue more than $500,000 a year by having pre-approval. There are 3 deadline dates throughout the year: February, June, and October. And one of the key eligibility criteria that I think those familiar from the SBIR, STTR area, is the fact that in this case, virtual applicants are acceptable, and you are allowed a resubmission. So when we get into the funding stages themselves, we can see the overlap in the broad scope of funding from basic research all the way to phase 3 clinical trials. Funding is available to you. So it's just very important that you correlate your R&D needs with the mechanism, guidelines, the scope of work, and the budgetary limitations, but you can essentially use these 2 mechanisms to fund your research from basic research all the way through phase 3. And there are 2 routes in order to go about having access to these non-dilutive funds. The first is a solicited route, which addresses a very specific area of interest from the particular agency. The second being unsolicited, and these are investigator-initiated, of which about 70% of the RO1, R21 awards stem from these unsolicited mechanism. It's called the Omnibus solicitation. And it's very important to try to establish interest prior to submitting, which means reaching out to the program officer to express your project to them in terms of aims and objectives, and to get feedback from them, whether that's in alignment with the interest of the agency. Whereas the solicited is very specific research that they're looking to fund, which we'll get into in a moment. But when we focus on the omnibus solicitations, which again are the unsolicited, where you're going to them with your research and expressing to them the aims and objectives, you want to make sure that you're responding to one of these 2 particular parent announcements: the R21 with the parent announcement to take note of, and the RO1 with the parent announcement to take note of. And as I mentioned before, you receive $275,000 in direct costs up to 2 years for the R21. And one thing that I did not mention before, which is the fact that you receive a 30 to 40% overhead for indirect costs, which brings the total amount up to about $380,000 for the R21. And then the RO1 offers, as I mentioned, $500,000 per year in direct costs per year for up to 5 years, and also a 30 to 40% overhead, which gives you about $3.5 million in funding over those 5 years. And again, you can see the due dates. We have the October 5th and October 16th for the RO1s and R21s coming up around the corner. So now's the time to prepare to pursue those. So when we look at the solicited opportunities, it's as simple as going to grants.nih.gov and doing a simple search. In terms of the total number of grant opportunities available to you, the RO1s have 279 available to you, and the R21 solicitations have 182 available to you. So we'll just, for example's sake, we'll do a search. And in this case, what we're going to be doing is searching for the search term of cancer. And we come up with 100 results, of which 28 of them are RO1s and 20 of them are R21 solicitations. And this is just based on a very generic search of cancer. You might want to put in something more specific to your own unique research interest, but in a very general sense of cancer, there are 100 opportunities between the RO1s and the R21s available to you. So, as I mentioned earlier in a previous slide, in terms of the funding ability of the RO1s and the R21s from basic research or preliminary research all the way to phase 3 research, there's the ability through a paired solicitation that's on the interest of the agency to support research, again, from very early stage proof of concept all the way through phase 3 within the same research scope. And here's some examples of paired solicitations, R21s, RO1s. And as I mentioned earlier, the R21s are the very high risk, high reward, very, very early stage, and then the R1 is where you have preliminary data in order to move forward with. So as you can see here, we have the NCI paired solicitation available to you, the NIAID, basic research on HIV persistence. So all of these are paired, and this is just an example. This is not the total universe of paired solicitation. When we look at the funding opportunities themselves on a solicited basis, you can see here under particular categories of science, the bioengineering is the medical device area, of which you have a couple available. And again, this is not inclusive of all of them. These are just some unique ones that I picked out for example's sake. So under central nervous system, infectious diseases, oncology, the slide deck will be available to you at request afterwards for you to take note of these. And then here's some examples of R21 funding opportunities. A couple from each category: central nervous system, neurobiology of migraine, research on chronic overlapping pain conditions, and again, infectious diseases, basic research on HIV persistence. So one of the things that must be kept in mind is making sure that your application is in alignment with the NIH interest from their review process, which in the center of this particular diagram is scientific approach. Good science is what wins awards, and so it's very important that your scientific approach be outstanding in nature, that meets the interests of the agency to promote health in the U.S. And so that for the betterment of health in the U.S. So you want to make sure that your scientific approach is in alignment with that. And then the other aspects that go into the review process are the leadership, who your PI is, your team of investigators, how innovative it is, the significance to public health, and then the environment, your research situation. And the scales on the side is to denote the fact that the agency is looking at this as a business decision, risk mitigation, if you will, in order to weigh the strengths of your research against the risks of funding you. So they want to bet on the right project. Again, they're not funding organizations, they are funding projects. So they want to make sure that they're funding a project that has the greatest chance of successful outcome, that it's a good use of funds. So from your standpoint, when you're pursuing these grants, it's very important to know the interests of the agency. And as I mentioned earlier, you can reach out to the program officers to discuss your particular project, the aims and objectives. You might have 5 particular aims and objectives within your project, and you'll be speaking with the program officer. and you'll explain, aims 1, 2, and 3, and 4 and 5, and they'll say, hey, aims 1, 2, and 3 are within scope, but 4 and 5 are out of scope. The program officer would suggest that you narrow the scope of your research to focus on aims 1, 2, and 3, and he'll suggest submitting. Now, obviously, there's no guarantee of actual funding, but it's very important to focus your project application and to have all of the pieces to the application, the biographical sketch of the team, a very clear budget, and most importantly, leveraging on research collaborations. All of these go into, again, risk mitigation, knowing that they're betting on the right project. So in terms of getting access to the monies that are available to you, you want to make sure that you target the right mechanism. You want to make sure that you're submitting your application to the correct agency for your particular project. So that's where speaking with the program officers come into play in order to explain whether or not to explain your science and whether or not this is in alignment with their interests. There's different sides of awards and success rates, as I mentioned earlier. There are RO1s, there are R21s, and there is an overlap in the mid-ground between the two. So if you're questioning whether to pursue an R01 or an R21, you want to make sure that it's the right mechanism that you have the greatest chance of an award. Because some projects will not have the right target. If you try to submit an R21, a very long-term, 5-year project for very early stage, because you want to have the trajectory of your research to carry you for a few years, that's not going to be in alignment with their interests. It's not going to be on target. So you want to make sure that you take a thorough strategic assessment of your scientific projects and link those tasks appropriately with the available pockets of money, and to submit multiple applications to the agencies. You cannot receive more than one award from a particular NIH agency simultaneously, but you can submit the multiple applications to them. So the Freemind Group can play a very strategic role in assisting you in your grant writing. As I mentioned earlier, we have 40 full-time employees, analysts who are all PhDs in their capacity of analyzing your science, and then we have the grant writers themselves, Masters of Science, and as you can see, our staff of senior analysts are all PhDs, and the manager of our consulting services are Masters in Science. So we have a very strong professional group that has the bandwidth in order to provide you the resources in order to submit your application timely. And more to point of the types of services that we provide two core service offerings. The first is a strategic assessment, which is looking at your entire pipeline of projects, looking at your R&D total funding requirements, as well as particular projects that can be funded through non-dilutive funding, linking those tasks with available pockets of money, and then coming up with a multiple submission strategy to maximize your chances of a win, and doing this assessment on an ongoing basis, because there are always new agency announcements coming out with non-standard due dates. And the second service is the actual grant writing itself. And this is a very strong point for us, is our project management ability, managing the project to ensure that everything is submitted timely and appropriately. And we provide you the comprehensive templates that are based upon the submission guidelines of the agency, and you send over your science, we put it in, and we send it back to you, and then it's just an ongoing feedback grant writing process. And so the final outcome, after it goes through our analysts for final review, is a very coherent application We've been, as I mentioned, doing this for 14, almost 15 years now, so we understand very clearly the interests of the agency, and we position your application to meet those interests. So we look at from a very holistic standpoint in terms of the cyclical process of the services that we provide. It's an ongoing process where we're constantly analyzing the opportunities, writing the grants, and then submitting the applications, and then the process begins again. So we're constantly looking out for our clients' interests by finding new opportunities for non-dilutive funding. It's not just a one-off project of a single application. So again, my name is Mark Cohen, Director of Business Development. I invite you to email me requesting the slide deck, which I'll be happy to provide to you. And I'm more than happy to answer specific questions presently that come up, so that we can have a so let me just address some questions here. One of the questions is how we get paid. In a very general sense, we work on a success-oriented business model where there's about a 6% success fee on the back end, and then there's a monthly retainer that's dependent upon the number of pipeline projects. And another question, which is more a general scope, it's somewhat out of the scope of the presentation today, but I want to just touch on it because I think it's relevant in some ways. Someone is asking how familiar we are with state and local funding agencies. We are familiar in a very general sense. I mean, we look at the entire landscape, but when you look at it from a standpoint of where the large money is available to you, that is through the predominant governmental agencies. Of the two that we look at mostly is the NIH and the DOD. And so we want to make sure that we're going after the best interests of the client by pursuing where you have the greatest chance of an award, not so much in terms of just putting applications out there across the whole body of the funding landscape, but to ensure that we're actually going after where there's where there's an actual opportunity to receive an award. Let's see. Let me try to find another question here. Okay, so once somebody asked this question, which I somewhat answered before, but are the institutes less likely to fund if they know that you submitted to another institute? As I mentioned, you cannot double dip. You cannot receive funding from two different agencies, whether it be Department of Defense or the NIH. They have data mining software, so they're able to determine that you received two awards. You can only receive one award. However, you can submit to multiple agencies because the criteria of the particular solicitation might be different, that you're able to meet those criteria. So you can submit multiple applications, but you can only receive funding for one particular project. And then we have, let's see, let me try to find another question or two here. Someone is asking if the success rates are for academia, industry, or for industry only. That's across the board success rate. So that's taking into account both academia as well as industry. And I'll just find one more question here. one more question. Okay, so someone is asking a very important question. Are the R01 and R21 grants also available for non-U.S. companies? Foreign companies can compete equally for these awards. The SBIR, STTRs are only for U.S. organizations. And they have very specific requirements for eligibility, whereas the R01s and the R21s, foreign companies can compete equally. The only requirement is to have a foreign justification, which is a very low hurdle of expressing why specifically your research is taking place outside the U.S., because that's where your PI is located or that's where your particular study is taking place. So we let me just maybe get one more question, and then we'll close things up. Just one moment. Okay. So there's quite a number of questions here, and I want to make sure that I pick one that's going to be relevant to all attendees. So just bear with me a second while I try to find one that's relevant to everyone. Okay. And someone's asking about that I mentioned earlier that there's room for growth for R01s for industry, and he wanted me to elaborate on that. Very simply, what we were trying to show in that particular slide, just going back to it here, is the fact that this $121 million that went to the R01s and the R21s is out of the entire $2.5 billion. So the industry has the ability to tap into practically $2.5 billion of funding that is really without a cap, whereas the SBIR, STTRs is a fixed 2.8% of the NIH budget. So there's no way to have more than $747 million in funding in any one year through the SBIRs. And so I hope that answers the question. Again, if anyone has any questions, please email me directly. I'm more than happy to send to you the slide deck so that you can see that and go through it firsthand for yourself. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And I thank you all very much for your attendance. And we look forward, if there's anything that we can provide to assist you in your non-dilutive funding quests, that we're here for you. Thank you very much, and have a great day.